They use their arms for something called hugging, or as the males call it, getting to first rock. It's a great, we call those frog banks where you take two opposing worlds and you bring them together and you use elements from both and get laughs from the combination.
Greetings, everyone. Come on in and have a seat up front for the Funny Muscle Podcast. If you're here, then you're looking to learn how to create laughs like a pro. So please help me welcome to the stage your co-host to help you do that, economics professor and open micer Chris Stifler and comedian turned author Mike Lucas.
Okay, so today we have a guest that we're very happy to invite on our show. He's been a longtime freelance comedy writer. He's written monologues for Jay Leno and David Letterman and Joan Rivers and others. And he's written a very funny book that I'd heard of before we approached him for the podcast. It's called Live from the Beginning of Time, Late Night Comedy Monologues Through the Ages. And this book wonders what it would be like if, since the beginning of time, late night talk show hosts walked the earth while commenting on the day's events. So it's a great premise and well executed. He's also an op-ed contributor and political analyst. Please welcome to the program, Ben Alper.
Hi, Mike. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us for our conversation today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I have been looking forward to this.
Oh, I was just going to say our target market is just newer comedians who are getting into the business and who are trying to learn how to joke right and who are looking for some guidance and some coaching in terms of their first year or two in the business. And so we invite guests on to talk about the different aspects of what might help them sort of not cut in line, but at least move forward quickly in line.
Well, I can talk about writing jokes. I have never been a performer, but
That's interesting though. That's go
Yeah,
ahead,
the
Chris.
podcast isn't live, so I'll edit the audio later and I take out Mike's which shortens the podcast significantly.
you probably hear a few ums from me.
Yeah.
I give
See?
each guest 15. You have 15 I'll clip.
And then the rest of them get played. It's just the way it goes. I'm what's the over under on me?
You get 38 Mike.
I got 38. Nice. I agree with that. We both Chris Stifler, my partner here, and I've read your book. We appreciate the advanced reader copy and laughed out loud. How long did it take you to compile all those jokes?
I worked on it over a few years, but not straight, a little bit at a time. And then, so about 2 years, I would say.
Why don't you give us an idea of what exactly this book is and how you came about with this idea to do such a crazy and fun stretch of monologues?
Well, this came easily to me, and some ideas you struggle with, some just come to you. And one day I was on vacation, and I was taking a walk, and boom, I just thought about this. I just thought, what if there'd been late night shows from the beginning of time? What would the monologues be? One of the nice things about it is, as opposed to regular monologues, is it's evergreen. It doesn't become dated. So I could write a whole book of monologues and not worry about them becoming obsolete the
Right.
day after I published it.
2 million BC is 2 million BC, no matter what year it is today.
Yeah. So it's like some guy talking about, did you hear about somebody discovered this thing called the wheel? They discovered this thing called fire. We've got some new people in our neighborhood now who only walk on two legs.
Oh, I love the line I love in that one is, it makes no sense. Who needs arms when you can push things with your nose? And all of these things beg for an act out. Like all of these things, even though in a monologue, typically there aren't a lot of act outs because you're sort of, generating these jokes over and over again. But I picture, doing the thing, pushing around the microphone with my nose, say, see, this is easy. There's no problem with this. Why bother with the other two legs?
Well, it's true. And another interesting thing about it is when people tell me they like it, they always tell me how they envision it being told. And depending on their age, they'll say, I could imagine I heard Johnny
Right.
Carson telling this. I heard Stephen Colbert telling this.
Well, it
Yeah,
makes no sense. Who needs arms when like you
yeah.
see Carson doing it, Jack Parr doing it, and all the whole Jay Leno and all of it. Oh yeah, the other line from that a Homo erectus walks on two legs, 2 billion or 2 million BC. They said they use their arms for something called hugging, or as the males call it, getting to first rock. It's a great. We call those frog banks where you take two opposing worlds and you bring them together and you use elements from both and get laughs from the combination.
It was a lot of fun, and I also what I didn't imagine is I just started thinking of ideas. The early ones obviously were the simple ones like the invention of the wheel, the invention of fire, the discovery of the light bulb. And then I didn't do it in chronological order. Uh,
Oh, smart.
and then when I got did about 100 of them, I said, okay, I got to put this into chronological order. People who have read it said, oh, this is like a little history book. So,
It is. It's
so,
fun.
so I'm now a historian, I guess.
Well, and it only goes up to a certain year, and then I was upset because I was like, I want it to come right up to the present, right up to whenever real monologues started popping in.
Well,
That's when you stop.
the reason I did that was because I just thought at a certain point we had actual people doing monologues. I was
Sure.
thinking of Will Rogers and people like that. Or I think I said I better stop at the invention of radio.
Oh yeah,
Be-
smart, smart.
You know, so there wouldn't be, it just seemed to be a logical place to stop.
No, for
Uh,
sure. And I picture there being a book too, though, where you can go through and I mean, there must be a million events that you didn't talk about that you could cover for a book too, if
it
if
is
you
a
felt so inclined.
it is unfortunately a lot of them have to do with war, but it's still,
That's
you
true.
know, but it was a lot of fun to do. And I mean, I just liked looking these things up and reading about them. And the other interesting thing is, yeah, I had to do events that people were familiar with because I couldn't really spend a lot of time explaining things. So I was always, so there are only a couple in there where I thought it just seemed like an interesting event. I'll do something about it and explain a little more, like the Whiskey Rebellion and a few other things.
Right.
Uh, but it also includes what what in the business are called desk pieces, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to call them because most people don't know what a desk piece is. The desk piece is, after the monologue and the host is sitting at the desk, he does a little short piece. So I forgot what we call it, but I ended up having just a picture of a guy at a desk, which is, if you look closely, that's
Perfect.
actually Letterman. We just blacked him out and put a coffee cup in front of him. But these are little short ones that are like, top five things, reasons, or,
Oh, I like the one five rejected Battle of Bunker Hill orders to troops.
oh
Instead
yeah,
of don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, you say, don't fire until until you've really given this a lot of thought. Or don't fire if your heart's not really into it. Or don't fire until I can get everyone together for a group portrait. That's like the mom of the group is saying that. Hold on. And again, I picture an act out of, tall in the back, short in the front. But I don't care if they're firing on us. We're going to get this done. We're never
You
going to
can't
get
see
together like this again.
you can't see the camera. I can't see you.
Exactly.
I think the first one I did was the one about the Trojan horse, things people said inside the Trojan horse. I think the first one I came up with was, remember, this is not a surprise party. Uh, yeah,
Yay!
so it was it was a lot of fun to do, and
That,
like all kinds of comedy writing, some came easy, some came hard. I think the biggest challenge is they're not, even though these are comedy monologues that a host would tell, because they're in print, they have to be written differently,
yeah.
and they require a little bit more explanation. And it was a kind of interesting. I had a conversation with somebody I know who was a longtime veteran of, I think both Letterman and Leno. And I was asking him, what do you think about this? And he had never written anything in print. He didn't understand the concept that this was going to be read. So
Right.
he's going, no, these things are too short. You got to do this. You got, and I'm going, no, no, this is going to be in a book. So it was,
Right, I get you, but then they'll read it, right? No, they will never. It'll just be the
yeah.
guy in his head or the girl in her head. Yeah, I'll bet it's so much work. How many monologue jokes would you say in total? I'm sure you've counted them. You had to have, right? How many altogether?
For some reason, they came out to about seven per page, and there's about 100 pages, and I would say maybe a every I think every 5 pages I did is a every five monologues is a desk piece, and I did
Right.
that to kind of break it up.
It's
But I mean,
nice.
this
Yeah.
is just what I do. I just write every day. I still do it. You
Yeah, I was
know,
going to ask you how, like, could you walk us through your writing process and in terms of how often do you do it? How long do you do it when you write and what's your protocol?
well, right now the main thing I write for is I have two and I started these essentially when I wrote for Leno from about the time he was guest hosting for Johnny until until he finished. So that was,
Okay.
1992 to 2013. And then I
Wow.
immediately after that, I switched over to Letterman to, and that went, I think he went a couple of years to 2015. And then from there, I started writing I had two sub, I still do two subscriber based weekly joke lists. One is Bay State Bombast, which is just news about Massachusetts. And the other one is
I take it that's where you're located.
I'm in Massachusetts, yeah, but I mean, I have to say I'm kind of addicted to it. When I go to Maine on vacation, it turns into Down East doozies, and I do Maine jokes. And
Like
and
wherever I am, that's where the jokes are.
yeah, so
Does
and
that annoy
then
your family?
I beg your pardon?
Does that annoy your family and friends to always be making up monologue jokes in every situation you go to?
They don't make up jokes, but they send me ideas. My brother, I come from a large family. There's about seven of us, and I have one brother who's always finding things online and sending them to me.
This funny, Ben. Make this funny.
Well, most he sends me good stuff. I mean, I'll give you an example. He's been sending me stuff about the two astronauts who are stuck in up in space. And today's story was about how they've had, I don't know if you've been following this. They went up on a little, I don't know if it was an Elon Musk capsule, but it got stuck and it's just broken. And they were supposed to go back in a couple of months ago and they're stuck there and they may have to be there until next year.
Whoa.
So I've been doing jokes about that. Plus, the good part is one of the astronauts is from Massachusetts, so I can include that in Bay State
Perfect.
Bombast. But the story he sent me today is that they've had nothing to do so they've grown a garden up there. So I'll probably do something about that. Uh,
Nice.
so I mean, he's always sending me things like that, and
Now,
I
up in
mean,
space, are they allowed to grow marijuana? Is it what is
well,
where's the line of where
Yeah.
the federal and the state and the space divide?
boy, I bet you they wish they can now.
Yeah,
Uh,
should have brought those seeds. Told you.
yeah. So, so I mean, my normal routine is I'm a news junkie, so I am always just looking for stories. So particularly, I'm a political junkie. So this week, I'm just, my eyes are just glued to the
Yeah, the
the
convention.
convention, and so a good portion of my time is just, I'm looking at stories. If I see something that jumps out. I write, I'll save it. I have a one file that I just keep everything in, and
Okay.
then on the day the jokes are to be written. I sit down, I write the jokes, and I usually wait until that day so everything is about as current as possible.
Are you a premise setup punchline guy, or do you do
Word
templates?
map.
How is your methodology?
My methodology is I basically try to write it as short as possible.
Okay.
I have a setup line and a punch line, and the funny part is the very last word. Um,
Yeah, I noticed that, and it seems like with a monologue, your premise and setup all have to be included in one line.
yeah, well, for a number of reasons, mainly because, well, I know with Letterman, he used to feel like, I need this, you need to be able to fit this on a cue card. Uh,
That's true.
but I mean, it's just the best jokes I think are short anyways.
Yeah.
Although I do remember, and I was particularly proud of this, I remember years ago, and I forget what the joke was about, but I found a news item and I thought, this is just so funny. And I kept trying to figure out how to um, write it as short as possible. And I just couldn't do it. But I said, it's a funny joke. I'm going to send it to Leno anyways. He's probably not going to use it. And then that night, I'm watching him and he starts to tell the joke. He's telling the joke word for word, but I could tell he was straining to read the cue card, but it just made me feel good that, the thing was funny enough that he said, okay, we're gonna do this one anyways.
And he did
Uh,
use your words too, like he didn't.
yeah. So I mean, so that's that with people always ask me what's the difference between writing for Letterman and Leno. Leno, if you wrote if you wrote a joke very just right and he liked it, he'd probably tell it pretty much word for word. Whereas I always found with Letterman, he would just kind of grab the idea and you know, you don't take it. I never took it personally, but it was just
No,
a
no.
different concept.
It's like listening to a jazz version of the song you wrote, and you can't take the other notes personally. It's just their interpretation of the thing. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Leno joke that you can remember over your career?
I don't have a favorite Leno joke, but I to be honest with you, there are just too many. But I have one joke that I always submitted when I was submitting stuff, and no one ever used. Well, after a while, you couldn't use it because it was a little old. But if you ask me what is the funniest joke I ever wrote, this would be it. And I would say that it's not necessarily the funniest joke, it's just the funniest joke to me. And this is a true story in Florida. They were operating, these doctors performed a cataract operation on a baboon. And after the operation, the baboon looked in the mirror and went, "My God, I look like a baboon." So I
This
always
whole
thought,
time I
boy,
thought it was my vision.
so
That's
that
great.
just happens to be something that I found really funny. So
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Like it's a blessing and a curse. We
yeah.
we we call that a positive to negative, where you take something that by definition should be considered something good, and it's now bad because I can see too clearly that I'm a monkey. Like, how long have you been doing this? What's your time span at this point? You're
I,
obviously
s-
you're about 23, 24, so
I'm a
probably
little bit
since.
older than you, I think. I started around right out of college, which was like around 1980, 1979 or so.
You're not much older than me.
I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was in Boston. I started doing a little cable TV show. It was a comedy show. I just wrote for it. It was just more sketch comedy. And I just started doing this for a few years. I would put little ads in the paper and get actors. And we just started doing sketches like uh, at the time, uh, I would do like um, spoofs on the Chamber of Commerce, and we'd have a horrible man talking about this horrible place, which at the time was Somerville, town called Somerville. Um, One of the actors, by the way, was a guy who was just finishing up from Emerson College, a guy named Stephen Wright,
Oh, nice.
No kidding.
and he was as funny back then as he was now.
Yeah.
Uh, but after a couple of years, I just went, I've been writing this stuff and people say it's funny, but how do I know I'm really funny? So I went out and bought one of these books that had names and addresses of famous people and agents and everybody in show business.
Right.
And I put together some samples and I just sent them out to everybody. I didn't hear back from many people, but I got one very nice handwritten note from Bob Newhart,
Oh,
which I still have, which is like, one of my most prized possessions. He,
yeah.
he wrote me back and he just said how much he liked the material and how talented he thought I was. And it was about as nice as you could get. And at that point, I said, I guess I can do this.
Oh, that's
Nice.
good.
So that
And you're like,
was,
Bob Newhart, what's my rate? What are you going to pay me? He's like, well, I'm not going to hire you. I'm just letting you
yeah.
know. Like,
Well,
ah,
I sent them some more stuff a few years later. He still turned it down, but still, I didn't,
yeah,
I
but
didn't, I,
that's got to feel like affirming to have someone like Newhart, a classic comic who's been in the business forever, tell you, hey, you got the goods, kid.
oh yeah. I mean, I just remember looking at this letter and just being stunned. And I went, oh
Oh
my
yeah.
God, this is Bob Newhart's telling me I could write jokes.
Wow.
I then went out to LA and I kicked around a while. And I think a lot of it was just trying to figure out what I really wanted. And it took me a while to figure out that I'm someone who ideally likes working by himself.
That's a
And
not a writer's room.
I'm not a writer's room kind of guy.
Yeah.
So but I made some good connections out in LA. I had an agent who actually submitted me to Johnny Carson at the time, and I was too naive to even understand what that even meant.
Right.
But now I go, wow. And the first thing I really started writing for that brought in income was, and not a lot, was there was this newsletter that it's not around anymore. It was called the Electric Weenie. And the Electric Weenie was used by DJs. If you were a DJ and you needed jokes on your show,
Oh, okay.
uh, you would you'd subscribe to this thing, and it would come in, and hear all the jokes you could tell on the air. So they needed jokes for that. So I would submit jokes to that and sell jokes to them. And
That's just
then
great to have on your resume. Just the words electric weenie.
yeah, it is funny.
Good. It's just catchy. It's clickable.
And the next guy I wrote for was a guy named Bob Orban. Bob Orban was a very well-known joke writer. I think he went way back to like Red Skelton, but then he ended up doing political consulting, and he ended up being working for Gerald Ford in the White House as a speechwriter. But then he started this newsletter after he left there called Orban's Current Comedy, and it was a newsletter for speakers.
Oh, okay.
And if you were someone who made a lot of speeches, you would subscribe to this thing, and every month you'd get this little flyer just full of jokes. So I started selling jokes to him, and it was good training because this stuff had to be very, very down the middle.
Yeah, I
Um,
imagine. Yeah, for a speech that you don't even know who's giving it and who they're giving it to.
yeah. So I got an example of something I sold him. Sometimes I get the strange and uneasy feeling when walking through a supermarket that I'm the only thing in there that doesn't cause cancer. Stuff like that. It's not going to offend anybody, So if you're a businessman and you're making a speech, you can do it.
Right, right, right.
And then I started selling to Joan Rivers. I forget
Huh.
how I made that connection. And that was interesting because again, I never met her or anything, but you know what a Joan Rivers joke was like.
Yeah. Yeah, like a hammer and you're the
Hammer.
nail.
So here's a Joan Rivers joke I sold. Ugly, he was truly unsuitable for framing. He's God's gift to inflatable women. conservative. He wears tweed condoms, stuff like that. So, but she didn't pay much, but she was very reliable. And one thing that made her different from anybody, at least I've worked for, is she would pay for a joke even if she didn't use it.
Oh,
Oh,
So I continued to sell to her. And then, a number of years later, I don't know why, I just decided I was going to send some samples to Leno. And this is when he had started guest hosting he was like Johnny Carson's permanent guest host.
sure.
And so I'd sent a sample of my work to him via The Tonight Show and him via his manager. And a couple weeks later, on the very same day, I got two responses. And on the same day, I got a response from The Tonight Show saying, thank you, but we don't accept unsolicited material. And the other one from his manager said, this is great. Thank you. Here's a contract. Just sign it and start sending us stuff. So
oh,
I always say I was rejected and accepted on the same day.
Oh, well. But do those offset each other? What is it a zero or did it come out with positive one?
I don't, I, I don't think the other one knew about the other one,
That's funny.
either one.
You got caught in the
And,
machine.
yeah. And then but I mean, that felt like a long time getting there. But the Letterman one turned out to be easier because the minute I finished with Leno and he finished his last show, part of me felt exhausted doing this because it's, you get up every morning and write, write, write. But I got up, I finished, Letterman, Leno finished, and I just started working on this book about introverts. And I had a friend who was friends with one of the producers on Letterman. And she said, I got a friend who's a producer. Do you want me to see if they need any more writers? And I said, yeah. And I sent her some samples. And like within a week, I was submitting stuff to Letterman. It was like, I just couldn't turn that one down.
Yeah, so walk us through what that's like when you're somebody who submits to a monologue like Leno or Letterman or even Joan Rivers. What do you have to do? Do you put a bunch on a page? Do you fax it? Do you text it? Do you email it? What's the process?
In the early days, it was a fax.
Mm,
And then at some point, I remember with Leno, it changed when, do you remember he temporarily lost the host of the 11:30 and they put him at 10. When he started up again with that, they switched over to email. And from then on, it was email. It's
okay.
the same. It's the same thing, basically. The way it works is I would record every night the show. I'd wake up in the morning. I'd look at what he was doing jokes on. If it looked like it was going to be something that had legs, like this is gonna be going on for a week, then you'd write more jokes about it. At that time,
Okay.
for instance, Bill Clinton, you'd be writing about Bill Clinton all the time. Now it's Trump. So I mean, if it was something like that, they were gonna be doing jokes on it
Like a show evergreen.
every night. Also, if they did a joke on something and it was just a really interesting topic, you'd say, yeah, they're going to do another one. I'll give you an example. The one about the Robert Kennedy and the bear.
Yeah, right.
Late night is a little different now, but I guarantee you Leno would have been doing jokes about that for a couple nights.
True.
Or a Michael Jackson story, they'd be doing that for a couple of nights. The O.J. Simpson trial. I found it kind of interesting, but usually you know when to kind of stop. When the story is just kind of, it was just time to stop doing jokes about it. I noticed when Colbert came back from vacation last week, which was like a week or two after that bear story, you could tell he just says, I got to do, and he kind of joked about it. I got to do stories on this bear in
I know I'm late
Central
to the
Park.
party, but I gotta do my
Yeah.
comedy due diligence.
So it's, you're just trying to figure out what do you think they're going to be doing jokes on. It's a little, I don't think the shows use freelancers now, so it wouldn't matter, but I think it would be tougher to be a freelancer now because they're doing more breaking news. You know, if they're going on at 5 or whatever and something happens at 3, they'll do a joke on it. Whereas, it's pretty safe if you send something in the morning that there's a good chance they could use it at the end of the day.
Right. They could
So,
play tape in the afternoon and then they air it at night.
and it's just volume, and
Yeah.
and it just happens to be something I really have always liked doing. I'm always looking at the news. I will always, to me, when you see that one story, is is gonna is gonna be a joke. It's just I still get excited about it. So and it's a grind, So if I think some people can do it, but some people can't.
You've been doing it for years. Can you like walk us through your brain process for like a new comic who doesn't have 20 years experience? Like I'm sure you can read the news and jokes come to you, but like what would you tell a young comic writer about how to like can you give them steps or templates or like low-hanging fruit of like do this joke first, do a or as they call it, blah 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 blah. Or like what is your if you had to design a template for a young comedy writer, how would you have them read the news and write jokes?
I would say, first of all, and I think this is the hardest thing, but it's the most important thing. You have to put yourself in the head of the comedian, and and I would say if you want to write jokes for Stephen Colbert, sit down and just start writing Stephen Colbert jokes, and you got to. I'm trying to think of what a guy from Letterman used told me years ago. Because I was talking to a guy from Letterman when I first sent him some stuff, and this was before I wrote for Letterman, and the guy said, "Well, you're a fan of him now. You have to be a you really have to get your head in. You really have to listen to him and just understand what he's saying." And I think this really applies to anybody. You just have to if a comedian says to you, "I need some material," you gotta listen to that comedian and get a feel for what they want. I mean, and it took me a while to figure it out. I can remember, and I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but years ago, this is before I wrote for Leno, a very well-known comedian. Somehow he contacted me and he sent me his comedy album, and he said, "Here, listen to this, and I need some more jokes." And looking back now, I could see that what I sent him wasn't even close, and that I just didn't wasn't really listening to what the guy did.
Wow.
It just took me a while to figure it out. But believe it or not, the guy still paid me. I was I've always been grateful for that because that's something you don't expect. Although what the guy from Leno said was Letterman. He said you're a fan of Letterman. Now you have to become a student of him, and that's
Right.
that's really what it is. You have to become a student of the person you're writing for.
That sounds similar to how Mike describes it in his books about you can do material that's just comedy quipper, comic quipper that anyone can do, or you can do bits that are unique to your lens. And it sounds like you need to really understand someone's persona and their comedy lens to really get into like their style of joke.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not, I would say this, I am a much better writer now than when I wrote for, say, Letterman or Leno, just because I've been doing it longer
Right.
and I'm just aware of these things. It's just that, I mean, to me, that is the hardest part. I would say it was a little bit easier for me to write for Letterman, excuse me, for Leno, because I think a little more like him. And what my idea of funny is what what is more like what he is what like his is. Uh, Letterman is a little bit more difficult. It wasn't to his are short. His jokes are shorter, and
There's an oddness
they-
to him that if you don't get why his oddness is funny, it's very difficult to jump into that world.
yeah. So I mean, particularly with Letterman, I would just sit there and I would just imagine I'm telling those jokes, or I would imagine he's telling the joke I wrote. Um, let's see, I have a this is a joke I wrote for him that he told New York, and this is true. New York City has loosened up its public urination laws. Initially, there will be alternate side of the street urinating. Uh, and he didn't quite tell it that way, But but that's what I sent him.
Right.
He was, and I, after a while, I could see he wasn't gonna tell any joke that exactly the way I wrote it, because he would just take a joke and then kind of walk away with it and start playing around with it in his head.
Yeah, that's the great ones do. They have an imprint that like Chris was saying, the comedy lens is so key to anyone who's at that level where they're hiring people to write their monologues, has a very clear comedy lens, one that they've sold to the public and one they've sold to the marketers. So it's up to us as writers to figure out what it is, huh?
Oh yeah, and it's I think one of the questions you said is what's your worst job or something like that.
Oh yeah.
I think the worst job is writing for a bad comedian because it took me a while to figure out that, in the beginning I thought, well, geez, this guy's not very good. If I wrote him some really good jokes, he'll really like that and he'll really appreciate it. And
No,
it doesn't
he'll
work
mess
that
those up
way.
too. He'll mess those up too.
Well,
He's
or
not
he
getting
just
it.
doesn't get it.
Right.
And I don't know how to make a bad comedian good.
Yeah, I
Even
don't know that you can because there's what our friend oh gosh, now I'm forgetting that our English author friend
Adam Bloom.
Adam Bloom, he says he quoted someone as saying that funny people are born and comedians are learned, and because it's a skill to make strangers laugh as opposed to just being a funny person to the people who know you.
that's so true.
And it's so such a process that our listeners are all trying to gather and execute over and over and over again, because you figure you're only on stage or you're only selling a certain amount of jokes for a certain amount of time during the day, and then the rest of the day you have to yourself to write and execute your craft. What if you had an hour a day to do this craft? What would you recommend for someone who's newer at it to do? Is there any exercises, or like Chris likes to say, is like your version of the push-ups,
I don't know, like I never took a lesson or a course, so I'm not sure.
right?
Uh,
Just do
I
it. Just do it.
I just sit down and just do it. I mean,
Do you
again, as I
long
said,
write first? Do you like sort of do like what's called like morning pages where you just free form words and
You're
then
right.
from that cherry pick your ideas, or do you go right to joke writing since you're an experienced joke writer?
I guess I go to joke writing. I spend the week collecting ideas. I have a text file.
Gotcha.
So if I see a story online, I copy that I think will be a good joke. I will just copy the story and put it into the text file. And then at a certain point, like tomorrow will be my day for doing just regular current event jokes. I'll sit down, open up that text file and start going through it. And then I go through those ideas and pick out the ones I want to do. And then I usually do 10 jokes. So I will based on that, I'll write 10 jokes.
Okay. And those are
Um,
the ones you'll submit.
no, these are jokes. I only write for myself now.
Oh, this is for your newsletter, your subscription
Yeah.
newsletter. Gotcha.
So for instance, but then there'll be some things, for example, during the week, a joke will come to mind. Like I've been watching the convention all week and they keep chanting, lock 'em up, lock 'em up. So I just wrote prediction at some point, chances will go from lock 'em up to give 'em the top bunk, you know. Uh, so I mean, to me, those are gifts when you're just thinking and just it just comes to you.
Right, right, right.
But I'll give you an example of one where I wrote this week for yesterday. Now this story was in the news this past weekend, and the setup line is a half a dozen women marched topless through Boston Common protesting for equality for women to be able to go topless in public. So I looked at that story and I said, okay, there's a joke there.
Yeah, who's
You know,
opposed?
so I immediately saved it. So then yesterday when it comes time for me to write the jokes, I'm going, oh, I can think of stuff, but I got it. This has got to be it has to be within the bounds of good taste.
Sure,
So
yeah.
you know what can I do with this? So I finally said, okay, and this is to me this is a nice tool to use when you just when you put words in when you can't think of something the person will say, think about something someone else might say about it. So my punchline was a quote. We're behind them 100%, said the leader of Plumbers Butt Cracks United. So so again,
Our sister group.
so I didn't want to really get into the what that story was about any more than the setup line. So I said I just gotta have someone else talking about it who's actually not even there. So that required a little thinking.
I like the invention of the butt crack union that we have a heightening device that is that where you create a fake institution and it supports the punchline or the setup. It's great.
And the next one was kind of like that too. This was in the news a lot. I don't know, you may have read about it. A Delta Airlines flight had to return to Boston after a 40-year-old former NFL player urinated for 20 seconds on another passenger who was a senior citizen. And I'm thinking, oh, you know, I could think of a million things, but I didn't want to really do something in really bad taste. So I finished with a quote. And yet he said, no one gives me credit for wearing a mask, you know. So so it just I looked at that and I said that's a safe way of doing that joke.
Right, right. That's funny.
It
20 seconds
sounds like
long.
it sounds like you can basically poach like literally like two sentences out of any news article, but then your brain asks, how can I make that third sentence a funny turn, a funny curveball, a different setup, a different cut to an extension? Is that how you would like if you gave me practice on doing monologues, but you just like your setup sound like just like the first line of any news article. That's not a
Oh yeah.
comedy article. But then you just kind of like finish it with a different
Oh,
is
that's usually the way it is. And keep in mind, these are being written to be read, not they're not going to hear them. So I can always go into a little detail. I mean, here's another example. Vast swarms of flying ants have been soaring around Jamaica Plain, Roslindale, and Hyde Park. These are neighborhoods of Boston. Or as a local ice cream stand calls them, sprinkles. You know, uh, so I
it,
mean that's my usually my standard format, and that's for I would say for most monologue jokes.
it seems like the or as blank calls it is a pretty repeated strategy or
Oh
repeated
yeah,
template in a monologue, right? Like I'm looking at your Pope Gregory the First, seven deadly sins, or as my wife calls them, me on my best behavior. There
yeah, and
seems to be a bunch of those.
that I guess it's because I'm used to doing that, and B, I wanted to make it sound like I wanted to make it sound like a late night monologue.
Right.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm just thinking like for a young comic that can't write jokes, but they're trying to start writing jokes, like that might be a first, like just try writing 10 of these. Take
oh
a
yeah,
sentence out
no,
of
I
any
mean,
newspaper and then just say finish the line, or as blank calls it, and then see what you can come up with.
write it as if you're writing for somebody. So I mean, if I were to what's the there's just too many of these guys. what if I were to submit something for Saturday Night Live's news, I'd write it like a news story.
And can you do that? Can you submit to Saturday Night Live like you used to, like for Leno today?
You used to be able to do it. I don't know if you can do it with any of these shows now. Not everybody, but
On the
if you're on
list.
the list.
Talk to us about like joke writing. Like some people say, like write 10 jokes, one would be good to do it for stand up. But you gotta be accepting that you're gonna do a lot of bad jokes that maybe not will work. But if you put the time in, one of 20 will be a really good one to use on stage. Is that similar with writing monologues that you just gotta write a bunch and then pick the best?
Yeah, whenever I wrote for comedians, and I haven't done it for a while, you just you look at their act and then just write a lot of material and then say, here it is, what do you want? Pick the ones you want. They cost X amount per joke, you know, and pray that they want to buy a lot. And that's why it's kind of bad, it's tough if you're writing for someone who's not a great comedian because they don't know what's good for them or they couldn't tell any of them anyways.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between something that's written and something that you're about to perform, and then the subtleties of the performance with the writing there's a certain type of writing that has that in mind. It keeps that in
Yeah.
mind that the performance will lend this element to these words.
The other extreme, and I guess in some ways this applies that well, I thought it did when I was writing for people who are not really great comedians, is if you're writing for someone who is a business person or a politician, my rule of thumb for that was make it read funny because they're not going to make the joke funny.
Right.
Um, if you write something for Letterman, you can write it a certain way. It might not be that funny, but you could see how he would take that and do something with it. If you're writing for someone who is a state senator or something like that, uh, you know it's going to be tough for them to get a laugh, period. So make it at least read funny.
Right. Makes sense. Well, this is fantastic, Ben. Thank you so much. I know your time is valuable, so I don't want to steal too much of it, but we really appreciate that. And a lot of your insights are going to be really valuable to our listeners because they want to be in your shoes. They want to be able to sell their jokes and tell their jokes and make strangers laugh.
Well, I really appreciate this. And if anybody wants to buy the book or get on any of my joke lists, you
Yeah, well,
just
how
have
can I
to
get a hold of you?
Yeah.
if you Google Ben Alper comedy, you'll come to my website, or it's Bennett Alper, BENNETTALPER Bennett Alper at gmail.com.
And
your book is on Amazon?
It's on Amazon too.
Yeah, live from the beginning of time, late night comedy monologues through the ages is wonderful. I've looked through that, and so did Chris, and we really enjoyed it. The other book, thank you for not taking or for not talking, a laughable look at introverts. I love
That's
that.
more of an explanation about who I am.
I love that, and I have a shy kid, so who's a performer. So it's introverts are an interesting subject.
Now, Ben,
Okay, well,
do you mentor writers at all? Like if someone wanted to reach out to you and said, "Hey, I've written some jokes, would you take a look at them?"
people have done that, but the hardest part for me is when someone says, "Here's some jokes. What do you think?" And I look at them and I just go, "These these are
You call
very
these
funny,"
jokes? That's what I think.
and I don't know what to say. So I've been like a guest lecturer at colleges around here, and that wasn't as quite as uncomfortable for me to do because I wasn't really critiquing things as much.
Yeah,
But
it's tough to critique comedy because it's so like it's so subjective. Like
yeah,
what's funny to me might not be funny to you, and what's funny on paper might not be funny coming out of my cake hole.
You have no problem critiquing my bad jokes, Mike. Like,
Well, they're so critiquable. That's the thing. They critique themselves, really. Well, Ben, thank you again, and we'll get a hold of you when the episode comes out with links and everything, and then
Okay, well, I really appreciate this. I had a great time and I wish you guys the best and thank you so much.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Okay, okay, take care.
Give it up for Ben Alper.
Yay.
What would you think there, Mike?
You know, the idea of every day looking at the news, if you're going to be a monologist, and figuring out also who you're writing for and what they already wrote about and what's on their list and mind of things that we are covering. I never really thought about that. That's another avenue to compile a good list of jokes to submit.
Yeah, I mean, it's not dissimilar to what you say to me. Is like write 20 jokes and then go through and find the ones that fit your economic comedy lens, and they're the ones you're going to rely on. But that means throwing away 16 jokes that don't fit.
Well, if you get to a certain level where your jokes are really good, the ones that don't fit you, sell them to someone else. You know,
Can you sell jokes now? Is there avenues now that like there used to be?
yeah, go down to the local open mic and say, "Psst, hey,
All right.
I got a dick joke for you, guaranteed to hit."